World War I was so drastically different from all previous wars that it had a number of unique effects of it. And in today's lesson, we're going to be exploring the lesson question that you see on the screen, scholars. It's, what were the effects of World War I? Let's get started with this lesson. The main lesson goal that you and I are definitely going to achieve today is to learn about the end of World War I. But that's a huge topic, so we're going to break it down into three more manageable chunks. First, we're going to identify the reasons the United States entered the war. Secondly, we're going to describe the war's major turning points. And third, and finally, we're going to analyze the provisions of the Treaty of Versailles. But we also want to take a look at these words to know that will help us achieve our lesson goals. Your academic words are idealist and neutral. And the final three are your domain or lesson-specific words, scholars. And those are armistice, reparations, and self-determination. At any time, you can look these up in your glossary, and I definitely suggest you add those to your e-notes as well. But like I said, make sure you keep your eyes open for these words as you and I go through this lesson together. Let me draw your attention to the top of the screen where you can always find the lesson question, scholars. It says, what were the effects of World War I? In order to answer that question, the first part of this lesson is going to look how Russia exited the war. And then the second part is that while Russia exited, we'll see how the United States entered the war. The third is going to look how the peace was very uneasy, and the peace was the Treaty of Versailles, was the fact that that got signed. But first, let's take a look at a cataclysmic event that took place before the entry of the United States into World War I, scholars. As war raged in Europe, the United States maintained its neutrality, meaning it didn't pick sides with either the Allies or with the Central Powers. However, that neutrality was definitely tested when, in 1915, the German U-boat sank the passenger ship Lusitania. You can see a picture of the Lusitania right here. Now, the Lusitania and a number of other cargo ships were being sent from the U.S. to Europe, especially to Great Britain and the other Allied powers. And Germany said, if you keep sending these ships, we will start sinking them. However, after the sinking of the Lusitania, there was over 1,100 deaths, including 128 Americans died on this sinking, and that enraged the American public. Now, Germany was so desperate to keep the United States out of the war that to avoid it angering the United States more, Germany agreed to limit submarine warfare. But this Lusitania disaster would have huge consequences, especially for the United States during World War I. Let me draw your attention to the top of the screen where you'll always find the lesson question, scholars. It says, what were the effects of World War I? We just took a look at a cataclysmic event, the sinking of the Lusitania, that would have huge ramifications for the United States and its entry into World War I. But before we take a look at the United States' entry into World War I, let's take a look at how one of the major Allied powers, Russia, exited the war. Let's get started there. Let me start by drawing your attention to the map that's on the screen here. Do you see Russia? It's right here. It's this absolutely enormous country here with an enormous population, and that was one of its major strengths. But if you look, Russia has to fight against both Germany and Austria-Hungary. On the Western Front, which is over here, France and Great Britain and Italy, they were predominantly fighting only against Germany. So Russia's actually fighting against two different central powers. And that would lead to extremely high casualty rates. But remember, like I said, one of Russia's strengths was its large population. However, the extremely high casualty rates that I just spoke of, those would lead to opening and an increase in opposition in Russia, where by 1916 the Russian army was near collapse. They were low on food, they were low on supplies, they were low on ammunition, everything that an army needs to keep itself going in the field. Also, not only were they low on supplies, but 5.5 million Russians had been killed or wounded in the war. And so, because of all this, people strongly opposed the war. Not only did they oppose the war, but they also opposed the government that was sending these troops to the war. And this led to a Russian retreat, and eventually, in 1917, the Russian Tsar, or the Russian Caesar or Emperor, was overthrown by a revolution. After he was overthrown by a revolution, Russia and the Central Powers signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk in 1918. And that basically took Russia out of World War I. Well, with Russia gone, Germany doesn't have to worry about fighting Russia anymore. So Germany takes all of its attention and heads west and can focus all of its power on Great Britain, on France, and eventually on the United States. Look at that, scholars. You finished the first part of the lesson, only 2 more left. Excellent work. I'm really proud of you. Before we move on to the second part, take a look at the lesson question. It's at the top of the screen. It says, what were the effects of World War I? Well, we just looked at how Russia exited the war and how Germany was able to turn all of its attention along the Western Front. However, almost in the nick of time, the United States enters the war, where they sent the predominant amount of their soldiers to the Western Front. So let's take a look at this second part, all about the United States entering World War I, scholars. You're doing great. With no more of its soldiers and no more of its attention needing to be turned on its Eastern Front, Germany turned to the Western Front. And not only did it force its soldiers over there, but they also broke the agreement with the United States to stop torpedoing all of the shipping of United States ships. And they continued the process of unrestricted submarine warfare. And this started in January of 1917, and they resumed it. And you may say, wait, I thought there was agreement between Germany and the United States. Well, Germany thought that they would be able to defeat the Allies in time before the United States ever mobilized its forces. And you can almost see you can almost see how successful Germany was during this time. This is the Allied and neutral shipping losses in 1917. This is in tons. So 200,000 tons of shipping up to 1 million tons of shipping. And look, in January alone, just under 400,000 tons. But look at that spike. Here in April, it was very close to 1 million tons of ammunition, of bandages, of food, of war material that was not getting to the Allies. So this obviously really turned the United States against Germany. In addition to this, the Zimmermann telegram ended up being the final straw that pushed the United States into war against Germany. What it was is that it was a secret telegram that tried to convince Mexico to invade the southern border of the United States. And it was sent to Mexico by Germany. And so what it was saying is that proposed that Mexico would ally itself with Germany against the United States. And this took place in 1917. If I take a look at this picture right here, you can see this is the the Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany. And this is a Mexican national right here. And Kaiser Wilhelm, if you look, he's saying, here. And if you take a look, there it is, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas. And he was also offering California if Mexico joined in. Well, this was the final straw for the United States. And on April 7th, 1917, the United States declared war on Germany. And its entry in the war really was the end of Germany as an effective fighting force. And the reason is that by June, thousands of American soldiers were fighting in Europe. They were able to get there much faster than Germany ever thought possible. Germany thought it would take 18 months for U.S. soldiers to get into Europe, and it was much faster than that. Also, the U.S. Navy escorted merchant ships across the ocean. So if a German sub was going to torpedo a ship, it would give away its position, and then destroyers or cruisers in the U.S. Navy would be able to find and hunt for that submarine. Also, the Allies began receiving supplies and reinforcements. And by September, there were 1 million U.S. soldiers. You can see some of them in Europe. And so after Germany tried one more offensive, they were all out of the energy, of the manpower, and of the resources. So you can see that the U.S. U.S. intervention in Europe was a major turning point in World War I. Finally, after years of fighting, on November 11th, 1918, an armistice was signed on the French-German border. And it was actually signed in a rail car that you can see right here. And what this armistice did, primarily and most importantly, the first thing it did is it declared the war was over. Then, secondly, it forced Kaiser Wilhelm II, the leader of Germany, to step down from power. These were the consequences of the armistice, but let's take a step back and look at what were the consequences or the human cost of the war as a whole. And in human cost, it was astronomical. About 9.5 million soldiers died and 6.5 million civilians died as a result of the war. But that wasn't it. There were actually 21 million soldiers who were wounded. And many of the soldiers, the millions from like the United States and Canada, who left Europe and went back to their home countries, many of them brought an epidemic, which was the Spanish flu. And this epidemic turned into a pandemic, meaning it spread the globe, where another 50 million people died because of that as a result of when it started in 1918. So the big takeaway here is that there was an enormous human cost to World War I. Wonderful work, scholars. You finished the first 2 parts of the lesson. You only have 1 more left. Stay with me. You're doing excellent. Before we move on, take a look at the lesson question at the top of the screen. The one we're trying to answer is, what were the effects of World War I? Recall, in the first part, we talked about how Russia exited the war. But once they exited, we then saw in the second part how the United States entered the war and really helped turn the balance of the war. But in this third part, we're going to see how the peace that was signed was quite uneasy. And especially, we're going to take a deeper look at the Treaty of Versailles being signed. So let's take a look at this last part together. In 1918, President Woodrow Wilson presented his plan for peace, which was referred to as the 14 points. And some of the provisions of the 14 points were the end to all secret treaties, which he thought had caused World War I, a freedom of the seas, again another cause of World War I, arms reduction, meaning that people could not have as big of armies, have as many artillery pieces, things like that. Also, he wanted self-determination for all colonized people, and he wanted a world peacekeeping organization. Here you can see Wilson right here presenting his 14 points to the U.S. Congress. But his vision of the post-war period was much different from the other Allied goals. For example, let's first, Woodrow Wilson. He was an idealist. He wanted peace without victory. He wanted to be very tolerant to Germany. He did not want to be very harsh in his punishment of it. But that was much different because look here at the second one of David Lloyd George of Great Britain. He wanted all of German colonies, but he also wanted some moderation. But the key thing here is he wanted German colonies to be taken away from them so that the British Navy would again have supremacy on the seas. This was even more moderate than the person from France, George Clemenceau, who wanted to punish Germany. Remember, most of the war was fought in France, so obviously George Clemenceau really wanted to punish Germany for the atrocities that took place on French soil. So what happened was that this eventually came to the Treaty of Versailles, where in 1919, Germany was actually forced to sign the Treaty of Versailles. One of the reasons Germany had gotten out of the war was because they believed that Wilson's 14 points, which are quite moderate, would be adopted. But let's take a look at what actually happened. The first was military restrictions, which placed a limit on the size of the German army at 100,000 soldiers. And they were also forbidden to have an air force or submarines, so they restricted the size of their military. The second thing that happened was that Germany lost many pieces of its territory and all of its overseas colonies. The third thing that happened, and possibly the most heinous part, especially on Germany's side, was that they were forced to take complete responsibility for starting the war. When Germany said, wait, we didn't start this. It was other people. Everyone was involved in starting this war. But Germany was forced to accept the war guilt. And because it was claimed that it was their fault, they were forced to pay $33 billion to the Allies in reparations, paying for the soldiers, paying for the crops that were damaged, paying for the houses that were destroyed, for the cost of fighting a war for the Allies. So you can see this would have long-term effects on Germany. And you'll really see, because of how detrimental this was to the German economy, you'll see the rise of another dictator a few years after this. Out of Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, only one of them actually came to fruition. And that was the creation of the League of Nations. And the idea of the League of Nations was a collection of all these different countries, and they would be an arbitrator for international disputes. And it was in order to create international cooperation. And the whole idea of it was to prevent another global war that they had just come out of. However, there was a struggle between the United States Senate, who felt rejected or neglected by Woodrow Wilson trying to make a treaty. If you've ever taken a government class by us, you'll know that treaties are ratified by the United States Senate. It's one of the checks and balances. Well, the United States Senate felt like they had been rejected by President Woodrow Wilson, who was making his own treaty. And because of that, the Senate rejected the League of Nations and the Treaty of Versailles. What I want to draw your attention to is this over here. This is a really clever political cartoon that's making fun of the League of Nations. So it says right here, "This League of Nations bridge was designed by the President of the USA. But if you look, you'll see here's Belgium and here's France. On the other side is England and Italy, the various allied powers. But look at Uncle Sam right here relaxing, and he has the keystone. And this should obviously go right here, but because it was rejected and by the United States Senate, it never became law, and it never had any significant strength behind it. So that was a huge effect of World War I. In addition to the lack of the League of Nations, the strength of it, there were also many territorial changes. Take a look at this. Here's Europe in 1914. Now, let me draw your attention to a couple places. Do you see Austria-Hungary? Right there. How about the size of Russia? Look at it. It went all the way over here. How about the Ottoman Empire? It's right there. Now, take a look at Europe, 1919, after World War I. Take a look at Russia. It became the Soviet Union. It is no longer Russia. But all of this land here, look at it. They lost all of that land. Also, take a look right here. What's missing? You'll probably notice there's no more Austria-Hungary. That broke up. How about the Ottoman Empire? Over here, not anymore. It's Turkey. So you see these major empires breaking apart.
Certain territories were taken from the defeated nations of the Central Powers and given to the Allied Powers by the League of Nations. These were called mandated territories or mandates. Members of the League believed that some of these former German and Turkish territories needed the support of the League. The purpose of the mandates was to ensure the well-being of the people by developing the region through improving education and spreading democracy. The aim was to create independent democratic states, promoting trade and preventing the enslavement of people, which was still practiced in parts of the region, but was long since outlawed in European countries. Much of the former Ottoman Empire was given to France and Britain. Look at the map. You can see that much of the former Ottoman Empire was given to France and Britain. Now let's review what you have learned.
Here's a really great timeline that shows the end of World War I. And you really get an idea on this, a visual representation of how long World War I lasted, from 1914 to 1918. And you can see some of the events that took place, like the United States declaring war on Germany. And you can also see the Treaty of Versailles that was signed as well. Let's take a step back, though, and you can see different things. For example, the spark that started World War I was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. So when you're looking at a timeline, always think, how are these things related? How did this start this right here? And how was the Lusitania being sunk finally bring the United States into World War I? Look for those cause and effects relationships, scholars.